What's up, guys? Welcome back to Newswave. The PlayStation 5 Pro fallout continues with all kinds of information popping up now, with some around the performance for this upgraded console that Sony may have been a bit quieter about during the presentation, as well as analysts chiming in with their thoughts on how many units this thing can actually sell, as well as why they believe Sony priced it as high as they did, and even sellouts happening before the console goes up for pre-order, though. We'll go over all of that here today. Also, we are going to be taking a look at PlayStation Plus Extra and Premium, as different games are going in for this month. They've been revealed, and one in particular surprised me from the PlayStation 2 generation. And then we also have Sega to talk about when it comes to the Sonic Adventure series. And, well, some of the things they said probably aren't going to excite a bunch of fans out there with the idea of Sonic Adventure 3, but we'll talk about that here today. So if you guys enjoy these videos, hit that like button, subscribe if you're new, and of course, members for the channel do get Newswave early. If you'd like to learn more about that, click the join button down below this video. And we're going to start today with a game that caught my eye, actually. It's out here in about 10 days on September 24th, and it's available for pretty much everything across the board, all consoles and PC. You can see the trailer for it here. This game is called Beyond Galaxyland. Now, this one I think really caught my eye because of the art style, the visuals they have here, sort of this pixel art look, and it's trying to mimic older games, obviously, maybe from like the 16-bit, 32-bit era, but doing a lot of things around that technically that wouldn't necessarily be possible back then. But then you dive into a bit further and you find out it is a turn-based strategy RPG, and it has a story that goes across the galaxy literally here, but also pays homage to retro sci-fi movies, and just looks very unique, I guess is the best way I can describe it here. Even has a capturing mechanic where as you go through, say, a bunch of different boss battles, they list 25 epic boss battles here, you'll be able to even capture some of them and use them as summons as you go through the game. So I'm interested. I'll be keeping an eye on this one. They have an entire gameplay overview trailer. If you'd like to learn more about that, I'll have it linked down below in the sources, but it is coming out here September 24th, again, pretty much for everything. Also, with the success that we're seeing right now in terms of review scores and hopefully sales, we'll see about that, but with Astrobot, of course, the idea of a 3D platformer with Microsoft, I don't know, using Banjo-Kazooie has come up multiple times. In fact, we can see this posted up. This was noted over on Pure Xbox, as Double Fine was congratulating Sobe team with Astrobot here, and then people were asking them about maybe making a platformer of their own using Banjo-Kazooie, and they simply just say no. And then they were asked about Conker, and they said, no, we want to make our games. And this is the interesting thing. So we've heard Microsoft and Xbox, Phil Spencer, Matt Booty, talk about the idea of bringing back some of these older intellectual properties. It's just finding studios to make these games, because there may be some that just don't want to actually make these games. They want to make their own games, as Double Fine says, and you can't necessarily make a studio create a new Banjo game if they don't want to, because you're just gonna get like a half-baked product at that point. So that's kind of the situation they're in. They actually have intellectual properties, but they seemingly don't have studios to make them, which is weird, because they bought a bunch of studios, so you figure somebody out there could make a new Banjo-Kazooie game, because look what we're seeing with Astrobot. Clearly there's a lane for 3D platformers. If they're done well, it's just Microsoft has to find somebody to fill that lane. Oh, and we have something here to keep an eye on for PlayStation 5 owners going into TGS. We can see this by Gamatsu noticed. They said Palworld is coming to PS5, according to a list of games at Tokyo Game Show 2024. It looks like we will have that presented here, so that coming up towards the end of this month. And the reason it went into Xbox really first is because they have an early access program that links up to Xbox, so why not throw it in there? And Microsoft, of course, also showed up and had it go into Game Pass, so it all lined up for them. And I guess when they go to version 1, they will be able to release on the PlayStation 5, and maybe that's what's happening here, at least making the announcement for this full version like 1.0, and then that PlayStation 5 release, which is something I've talked about multiple times in the past, so not really surprising to see this, and I'm sure it'll give a pretty big spike in terms of just concurrent players once it releases on the PlayStation platform. And guys, with some of the quick news out of the way, let's get into the bigger stuff. Let's start right away with the PlayStation 5 Pro, which has been a very interesting topic since that trailer dropped, or the presentation really from Mark Sony, but then the subsequent trailer after that, with the price tag listed at $700 in the US, and actually much, much more in other regions across the world, some approaching or even over $1,000 when you have the disk drive add-on attached to it. Well, now we're getting more and more information, of course, as press releases go out and people start digging a bit more into this. For example, we can see this from Tom Warren, who says, reported earlier this year that PlayStation 5 Pro enhanced games doesn't guarantee 60 FPS. Sony wasn't super clear on this yesterday, but there will still be 30 FPS PS5 Pro enhanced games. In fact, Digital Foundry noted that it appeared Hogwarts Legacy was running at 30 FPS during the presentation. Of course, they were showcasing all the different lighting and ray tracing and better shadows. But this is kind of the harsh reality here, guys. Keep in mind, the PS5 Pro is still sharing the same CPU. I believe they boosted it by, 10% or something? But if there is a game that is CPU bound, I mean, it's gonna still probably stick at that 30 frames per second. I don't know if they're gonna be able to crack through that and end up in the 60 FPS territory, even with a significantly more powerful, we'll say, GPU. It's going to be stuck. It's going to be bottlenecked by that CPU. And that's one of the reasons we've kind of discussed this already. The idea of next generation. I know it sounds funny to say that now, but next generation maybe being the one where we truly break through and just have 60 FPS as the baseline. That, of course, being the next time they'd really have a shot at upgrading the CPU in any meaningful way. We saw this last generation where the PS4 Pro and the Xbox One X, for the most part, kept those Jaguar cores and just strapped a massive GPU to the side of them for those mid-gen refreshes. However, analysts are looking at this maybe in a bit more of an optimistic tune because they think that this system is going to sell fairly well when it comes to mid-gen refreshes. Actually about on par with the PlayStation 4 Pro. This we can see is posted up. This is from Ampere Analysis, and this was actually quoted through IGN and then also VGC. And the reason they have right now for why the system is $700, start with that, saying the lack of competition means it is an easier decision for Sony to run with a higher price point to protect its existing margins. Some Harding Rolls saying, for most prospective PlayStation 5 consumers, the standard edition will represent the value sweet spot. And that is a big thing here. Obviously, the PS5 Pro is optional. You can just stick with the current PS5, and I think get a pretty good experience probably to the end of this generation. Now, as we get closer to the end, you will have games that, of course, push that base unit more and more and more, and yeah, you probably will end up with games that struggle with frame rate or just look blurrier. But if you made it this far, you can probably go another couple years until the PlayStation 6 starts to really make the rounds. Now, when it comes to sales, Ampere expects Sony to sell around 1.3 million PlayStation 5 Pros during the console's 2024 launch window, compared to the 1.7 million PS4 Pros sold at launch in 2016. Quote, we expect the price point to soften demand with some consumers, but for PlayStation enthusiasts, the pricing is less of a consideration. And yeah, for enthusiasts, they're probably already locked in on this. They want a more powerful PS5, and that price tag isn't a huge deal for them. Or maybe they look at that and say, I have a PS5 now, I will trade this one in, cut down on the cost of that Pro, and at times, based on what I think GameStop was giving, upwards of like $350 or more for a PS5, which sounds crazy because, I mean, that's almost the value that they'd sell it for. But basically, you'd be able to cut down on that PS5 Pro price significantly if you're going that route. And most of the PS5 enthusiasts are already buying headphones and earbuds for $200 or more. So they're already heavily invested in that ecosystem. Basically, when the system first shows up, don't be surprised if it sells out. In fact, I would completely expect it to. The question will be, will they be able to continue selling them over the long haul, basically over the next 3 to 4 years, or will sales fall off a cliff after all of the enthusiasts have picked one up? Also, the lack of competition, that is an interesting topic to get into because we clearly see Microsoft foregoing the idea of a mid-gen refresh, and I think right now they are setting up their plans to make a move to next generation very soon. Well, sooner rather than later. The belief right now is that they are targeting the end of 2026 to launch their next Xbox console, which would be a 6-year life cycle. That's something we were used to back in the day. It's just become more and more extended with diminishing returns that we've seen in terms of visuals. So I feel like Microsoft would have to have some other idea in mind. But because they seem to be more focused there rather than in the present with an idea of a mid-gen refresh, yeah, you have the PS5 Pro pretty much going unopposed, and you don't have a console next to it that might work to drive down the price through competition and have this thing not make a bunch of money on top of it, because it seems like Sony's margin is there, whereas usually you'd sell a system at a loss or break even just to get people into your ecosystem, but not necessarily if there's no Microsoft with an Xbox One X next to you. Now, it's also important to note that that disk drive, the attachable disk drive for the PlayStation 5 revision currently, but will apparently work on the Pro model according to Sony, has already sold out pretty much across the board. So at Best Buy, it's not available. And I did notice this on Amazon as well as other places like Push Square and more. They were tracking it throughout the day, and eventually it jumped all the way to number 8. So it was like an 8,000% increase or something. And then it just disappeared off Amazon. Like there's no more stock. So people are preparing for the PlayStation 5 Pro, or scalpers are preparing for the PlayStation 5 Pro. I mean, you can take your pick, because if the PS5 Pro comes out and there's no disk drives available, well, that disk drive is just going to be significantly more expensive. So they might be buying and just holding on to this, thinking it's an easy 3 or 4x of a flip by not even having to buy the PS5 Pro. So we'll see as we get closer to that release window in November if more stock pops up, or if it's a situation of, well, there's none out there, so now you have to pay $250 for a detachable Blu-ray drive, because of course Sony has to, they gotta make it unique, don't they? Next up, let's talk about PlayStation Plus Extra and Premium games that are going in this month. These will all be available starting September 17th, and we have one game that I'm very excited to see go in day one, and then another that's making a return from the PlayStation 2 generation that I think is absolutely hilarious, because I would like to see what the newer generation that wasn't necessarily around at that time buying games and playing them, what they think of what is a more creative title, we'll say, from that time period. But we'll start here at the top with PlayStation Blog, and that starts with The Plucky Squire. PS5, it is there day one, September 17th. I'm excited to jump into this. I mean, I did just play Astrobot, but I still really like the way that this game looks. I'm not like tired of 3D platformers, even after spending about 15 hours or so in Astrobot. Usually I like to jump around between different genres of games, going from one, maybe like a 3D platformer, then to a shooter. But I've been keeping an eye on Plucky Squire for a while. I'm ready to jump into this one next week. Then we have Under the Waves, PS4, PS5. Night in the Woods, PS4, PS5. Chernobyl Light, that's PS4 and PS5. The Wildcard Football, PS4, PS5. Space Engineers on PS4 and PS5. Road 96, that's on the PS4, PS5. Ben 10, that is a PS4 version specifically. And then Far Cry 5, same deal there on the PS4. Now we do have PSVR here. Okay, so we have Pistol Whip. That's the one game they have. And you know what? That's actually a pretty good game. So that's not a bad addition for the dozens of people out there that still have their PSVR 2 hooked up. Wow, Sony really forgot about that thing. But at least they're adding some value here with their subscription. Now, on to the classics. And look, we just came off a month with a bunch of Time Splitter stuff. So that was a really cool setup there. Now, check this out. Secret Agent Clank, which was an awesome PSP game. Like, people love this game. Here it is now going into the service. Then we have Sky Gunner, which I wasn't as familiar with. People did still at least mention this when this was announced yesterday. So I mean, maybe I'll get a chance to check it out. But the one that I looked at and said, oh, they're really doing it. Mr. Mosquito. Let me tell you, this is, well, first of all, there's not many games out there where you're playing as a mosquito the whole time, right? This is a window into the creativity of the PS2 generation, because this is a game. Think about it this way. These are games that had to be published and put on store shelves physically to sell. You didn't have that I guess, pipeline to go digital and then just go through as an indie title and just kind of set up on an eShop or PlayStation Network. You had to get legit funding and go through a lot of other avenues to get your game out there on a store shelves. And Mr. Mosquito was indeed one of them. And it's, again, you play as a mosquito, you annoy people in a house. They have 12 levels as they show here in the household. And you can use stealth or prepare for air combat. I recommend firing that one up just to try it, just to see some of the games we were dealing with back then, because it's a time period I think a lot of us look back on fondly, But I do think if you play some of these games now, not necessarily Mr. Mosquito, but others, you'd be like, how did I play this game? Control-wise, that kind of thing. But I do believe like the aesthetics of the games, like how they look, some of the ideas, it's still kind of unmatched from back then. And this is just another example of just some of the weird stuff we'd walk into your local game store and find. And in our last bit of news, let's talk about Sega and 3D Sonic games. Now, we assume their next big 3D Sonic game is going to be Sonic Frontiers 2. They seem pretty happy with the performance of Sonic Frontiers and look at it maybe as like a foundation for a formula going forward, how they approach some of these 3D Sonic games. But there is still the question of, would they ever consider making a Sonic Adventure 3? Because Sonic Adventure 2 is still looked back on right now as just a classic title in Sega's library. I mean, Sonic Adventure 1 as well, but I think that was more the sense of it coming out with the Dreamcast and looking incredible. Sonic Adventure 2 just took things to the next level. Well, we have an interview, which you can see this is posted up over on VGC. And this is what Sonic team head Takashi Iizuka says. It's not a standalone game. They're referring here, by the way, to Chao Garden, as they were also asked if they would do a standalone version of that, separated basically from the Adventure series, saying it's integrated into the whole Adventure series gameplay. So we can't just break it off and make it a thing. And so it's like, all right, well, if you're asking for Chao Garden and Adventure 3, then that's pretty much asking for Adventure 3. Oh, see, we're on to something here. All right, what are we doing with that? I think at some time, I'd like to say, hey, yeah, we're making Adventure 3, but we don't have plans for that yet. It's just one of those things that if the stars align and it can all happen, then yeah, we'd love to make it. So obviously a disappointing statement there for Sonic fans, as many do call for Sonic Adventure 3, but also to me, that's a title you want to see pop up when Sega is extremely confident in making it. And the way they're talking about here with the stars aligning and things working out behind the scenes, it does feel like Sega right now is really on this Sonic Frontiers boat, and I think they have to get past that and maybe come back and return to an Adventure 3 and go all in on that. And that's the only way I'd want them to approach this, because they don't even want to separate Chao Garden from it. That would probably work as a standalone game on all different platforms, even on just mobile phones, but they don't seem to even want to do that. So at this point, my only thing would be, hey, let's do some sort of serious remaster that, we get those remasters that border on remake. Like, we have a hard time telling if it's a remaster or remake. Do that with Sonic Adventure 1 and 2. Like, really put in the effort. And I feel like that on its own would do well and would probably get people introduced to that sort of franchise, that series for Sonic. And then you make the big push for Sonic Adventure 3. But most likely that'd probably be years and years, maybe even close to a decade from now, because something tells me we're going to get a bunch of Sonic Frontier stuff before we can come back to anything with Adventure. And before we go to the comment of the day, we'll take a look at the poll that I posted up yesterday. We're asked, if the choice is available, do you prefer a cleaner looking fidelity mode at 30 FPS or a blurrier looking performance mode at 60 FPS when you play a game? Look at this, 81% say performance, 90% say fidelity. I've talked to many people who tell me they just leave it on fidelity because they like how it looks and they've never switched to performance. And then I'll tell them, there are a few friends of mine, I tell, hey, try switching it to performance, play with that for like an hour, then try to go back to fidelity mode. They'll be like, why did you tell me that? Now I don't want to go back to fidelity mode. That's the effect it has on you when you do experience that smoother gameplay at 60 FPS. It ruins fidelity mode. It just does. So that's kind of the thing now is, if you think back to last generation, it really wasn't an option for a lot of people. If you had the base PS4, the base Xbox One, you didn't have that little toggle that said, oh, performance or fidelity. You did if you had the PS4 Pro or the Xbox One X, but as we see with some of the stats, that just wasn't many people compared to the 120-something million PlayStation 4 consoles total that sold. Now, though, if you have PS5, you have that toggle, and turns out a lot of people are going to performance. I made a longer video on this on the second channel that should be going up today, so check that one out, because I think that could actually set things up for next generation. I know, again, next generation, where maybe that 60 FPS is something that's leaned into much more by developers. And we'll finish up with the comment of the day, as you're seeing here. This is from Krobinson, who says, Sony just handed Nintendo a big win. Nintendo can announce their next system with a $399 or $499 price, and it will be seen as the most reasonably priced. Well, I mean, we have the PS5 Pro, okay, but they're still just the regular PS5. In fact, Sony has now listed refurbished systems that start at $349. So while there's a lot of attention on what's become the roof of consoles in terms of price point, you still have the median, or like most people are going to be buying, I still think, the regular PS5 disc-based unit or even digital. So they're going to stick around that $450 to $500 price range brand new. So even if Nintendo did release their next is the Switch 2 at $399, I still think they come in at a price point where people are more accepting of it. But again, keep in mind, the PS5 Pro is not the standard that most people are going to be looking towards. So it makes everything else kind of around it look cheaper, sure, but I don't think it's a great comparison for the Switch 2. I think just the regular PS5, the Xbox Series X, I guess then, you could maybe compare Series S even, but probably Series X, PS5, those are the better comparisons, I think, in terms of price point for the Switch 2. And ladies and gentlemen, that's going to do it here for Newswave. If you enjoyed this video, guys, hit that like button. If not, hit the dislike. Leave comments down below about everything we talked about here today. If you missed yesterday's Newswave, I'll have it up here in a card, or maybe you want to see that Astrobot controller up close as I unbox it. I'll have that link below it. Thanks, guys, for watching, and I'll see you next time.